In the land of Eldoria, the elves were masters of all they surveyed. Their magic flowed like a river, endless and powerful, and their ageless beauty and grace were the envy of every other race. To the elves, humans were little more than tools. Long ago, they had conquered humanity, forcing them into labor and servitude. The great city of Lunathar, where the elven rulers resided, stood as a monument to their dominance. For centuries, humans had lived in the shadow of elven power, their wills crushed beneath the weight of the elven empire. They had no voice, no freedom. Their lives were spent toiling away, working for the elven lords who saw them as little more than an inferior species. Kale, a young man from the human district, had lived his entire life under the elves' rule. He had grown up hearing the stories of ancient human glory when they had ruled the lands before the elves came with their magic and shattered everything. He often wondered what it would be like if the world was different. But as he worked in the fields or cleaned the streets, those thoughts seemed far away, like a dream that could never come true. On that day, Kale had been sent to gather firewood on the edge of the elven forest. He trudged through the woods with the heavy sack of wood on his back, his thoughts wandering. The elves often sent humans into the forest to do their bidding, even though the trees were sacred to them. Humans weren't allowed to approach the deeper parts of the forest, where the ancient elven temples and shrines lay. But it wasn't uncommon for them to be sent on dangerous errands, for the elves believed they were above any of the troubles the humans faced. As Kale passed through the trees, he noticed something strange: the quiet. The forest was never this silent. Normally, the sound of birds, rustling leaves, and the whispers of the wind filled the air. But now, there was nothing. A chill ran down his spine, and he slowed his steps, his senses alert. Then, he heard the sound of footsteps, soft but unmistakable. He turned, his hand instinctively gripping the handle of his axe. Out of the tree stepped a figure. At first, Kale thought it was an elf. Kale couldn't stop thinking about the man in the forest. His words echoed in his mind, pushing away the usual doubts and fears that had always held him back. "There's a way to fight back," the stranger had said. The idea seemed impossible, yet something in Kale's gut told him that it wasn't just a dream. If there was a chance to change the world, to stop the elves from controlling everything, he couldn't ignore it. The next morning, Kale woke early. The city of Lunathar was still shrouded in darkness, and the elves who lived in the grand palace at its center were still asleep. Kale had to make a decision. Would he continue to live as a servant, like everyone else, or would he try to uncover the truth behind the stranger's words? He chose to seek out the truth. Kale made his way to the hidden part of the city, the part where humans rarely went. It was a place few dared visit, a place full of old buildings and forgotten ruins. These buildings had once been part of the great human kingdom before the elves had taken control. Now, the ruins were a silent reminder of what had been lost. The Duskborn, a secret group of humans who believed in freedom and the return of human power, had used this area for years. Kale had heard rumors about them, whispers from other humans who secretly believed that the elves' rule wasn't unbreakable. The Duskborn had hidden themselves well, knowing that the elves would punish anyone caught plotting against them. Kale had never seen them, but he knew that if anyone had the answers he needed, it was them. He walked through narrow streets, avoiding the main roads where elven patrols walked. His heart beat faster with every step. The city felt different now, as if something important was shifting in the air. At the edge of the ruins, Kale found the entrance to an underground passage, half hidden behind a pile of broken stone. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed aside the rubble and crawled through the opening. The passage was dark, the air thick with dust. His footsteps echoed softly as he moved deeper into the underground tunnels. After what seemed like an eternity of walking, Kale finally saw a faint light ahead. He quickened his pace, and as he neared, the light grew brighter. The passage opened into a small chamber where several humans were gathered around a fire. They were speaking in hushed voices, their faces grim. They looked up as Kale entered, surprised to see him. One of them stood and stepped forward, a tall man with a scar across his face. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cautious but not unfriendly. "I'm Kale," he said, trying to sound confident. "I need to speak with the Duskborn. I need to know about the artifact." The man raised an eyebrow. "The artifact? He repeated, "Why would you be asking about that?" I, I found something, Kale said, his voice shaking slightly. "In the forest. A stranger told me it could help us fight the elves. I don't know what it is, but I think it's important." The scarred man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You came to the right place. We've been searching for the artifact for years. It's not just a legend, it's real." Kale's heart raced. "What is it? What does it do?" The man motioned for Kale to sit by the fire. He did, his mind spinning with questions. "The artifact is a relic from the time before the elves came," the man began. "It was created by humans who had the power to match the elves. This artifact holds great magic, a magic strong enough to challenge their rule." Kale leaned forward, his eyes wide. "How do we use it?" The man's face darkened. "That's the problem. The elves know about the artifact, but they kept it hidden. No one knows where it is or how to use it. But if we can find it and understand its power, we can fight back." Kale felt a mix of fear and excitement. He had always been told that the elves were unbeatable, that no one could stand against them. Yet here he was, sitting with people who believed the opposite. The man continued, "We don't know all the details, but the artifact is tied to the old human kingdoms. If you're serious about this, Kale, we can help you find it. But it won't be easy. The elves have hidden it for a reason." Kale's heart beat faster. The elves had hidden the artifact, but he now had a chance to uncover it. He looked around at the faces of the Dustborn, seeing the same spark of hope in their eyes. He nodded. "I'm ready. What do we need to do?" The man smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Kale felt a sense of purpose. There was hope, real hope. The fight for freedom had begun. The days that followed were filled with planning. Kale barely had time to sleep. The Dustborn were unlike any group he had ever known. They were organized, focused, and committed to the idea of freeing humanity from the elves' rule. But Kale quickly realized that their task was not easy. The elves were too powerful, their reach too long. The artifact was their key, but finding it would take more than just courage. It would take strategy. The scarred man, who Kale had learned was called Jarek, became his mentor. He taught Kale how to move in the shadows, how to avoid the elven patrols, and how to think like the enemy. Kale had never realized how careful the Dustborn had to be. Every step they took was a risk, but they moved forward because they had no other choice. One night, as they sat around a campfire hidden deep in the ruins, Jarek outlined their plan. "The elves rely on their strength and magic, but they're not invincible," he said, his voice low. "They'd grown complacent, thinking no one would dare challenge them. It's time to remind them that we're not as weak as they think." Kale leaned forward. "What's the plan?" "We've learned that the elves are transporting supplies to a secret location for one of their most important rituals," Jarek explained. "If we can strike at that transport, it'll throw their entire operation into chaos. They'll be forced to focus on us, and that will give us the chance to strike at their heart. The artifact will be the key to that." Kale nodded. The idea of taking action, of doing something to stand up to the elves, filled him with a sense of purpose. He had been living in fear for so long, but now he was part of something bigger than himself. He was part of a fight for freedom. The Dustborn's plan was risky, but Kale couldn't back down. They had to move fast. The elves wouldn't let them get away with it, but the longer they waited, the stronger the elves would become. In the dead of night, Kale and the Dustborn set out toward the elven transport. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the patrolling elven guards. Kale's heart pounded in his chest as they approached their target. This was the moment. If they succeeded, they would have a chance to fight back. If they failed, it didn't bear thinking about. As they neared the transport, Kale could see the elven soldiers unloading crates filled with mysterious supplies. The elves moved with precision, each one performing their tasks with eerie perfection. The transport was heavily guarded, but the Dustborn had a plan for that. Jarek nodded to Kale, signaling that it was time to strike. Kale felt the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This was no longer just a mission, it was the beginning of a revolution. The Dustborn moved silently, spreading out to take their positions. Kale was tasked with causing a distraction. He wasn't sure how he would pull it off, but Jarek had faith in him. Kale crouched behind a nearby tree, his breath steady. The transport was close, and the elven guards were focused on their work. Kale took a deep breath and tossed a rock in the opposite direction, causing a loud noise. The guards immediately turned toward the sound. It was enough of a distraction. The Duskborn moved in quickly, striking at the guards before they could react. There was a flurry of movement as Kale and the others fought to disable the soldiers. Kale's heart raced as he fought. The elves were skilled with their weapons and magic, but Kale had learned from Jarek. He used his speed, his knowledge of the terrain, and his cunning to outmaneuver the elves. With every strike, he could feel the tension building, the weight of the fight growing heavier. But this was what they had come for. This was the first step toward breaking free. The battle was fierce, but the Duskborn were quick and efficient. They managed to take down the elven guards, and within moments, they had secured the transport. Kale's hands shook as he looked at the crates. What was inside? What did it mean for their plan? Jarek approached him, his face grim but determined. "We've made our point," he said. "Now let's get out of here before they bring reinforcements." Kale nodded, his heart still racing. They had done it. They had struck the elves, and for the first time, they had shown the world that they were not powerless. The elves were not invincible. The fight had only just begun. As they retreated into the shadows, Kale felt a rush of adrenaline. This was just the beginning. The first strike had been made, and he could already hear the whispers of change stirring in the air. The night after their attack, Kale couldn't sleep. He lay on the hard ground, staring up at the dark sky. The stars were bright, but the quiet seemed heavy, filled with the weight of what they had done. They had struck a blow against the elves, but Kale knew it wasn't enough. They had only just begun to challenge the power that had ruled for centuries. In the morning, Jarek gathered the Duskborn. Kale joined them by the fire, listening as Jarek spoke. "Last night was only the first step," he said, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "The elves will retaliate, but they'll also be forced to rethink how they deal with us. We need to keep moving. We need to stay ahead of them." Kale nodded. The night's victory had felt like a dream, but it was also a reminder of how far they still had to go. He had never been part of something like this before. He had always been a servant, a worker in the shadows. But now he was part of something bigger, a movement that was challenging the very foundation of the Elven Empire. Jarek's plan was clear. The Duskborn would move quickly, hit the elves in multiple places, and keep them off balance. They would strike at supply routes, sabotage elven equipment, and gather as much information as they could. The artifact was still their ultimate goal, but each small victory would weaken the elves, make them more vulnerable. The first target was a caravan of supplies headed for Lunathar. The caravan would be heavily guarded, but the Duskborn knew the land better than the elves. They could ambush it at the right moment. Kale was ready. He had learned quickly in the past few days, and though fear still gnawed at him, it was now replaced by something stronger: determination. The attack was planned for the following night. Kale and a small group of Duskborn moved out in the darkness, their steps light and careful. They knew the caravan's route and the best place to strike. As they made their way through the forest, Kale felt the weight of their mission on his shoulders. Every action they took, every decision, could mean life or death, not just for him, but for everyone who believed in their cause. When they reached the clearing where the caravan would pass, Kale's heart pounded in his ears. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the ground. Jarek gave the signal, and they moved into position. Kale crouched behind a large rock, watching as the elven caravan appeared in the distance. There were more guards than he had expected, 6 elven soldiers, their armor glinting in the moonlight. The caravan itself was a long line of wagons, each one loaded with crates and supplies. As the caravan drew closer, Kale felt the tension rise. Jarek motioned for them to hold, waiting for the perfect moment. Kale's heart beat faster. The sound of the caravan's wheels on the ground filled the air, and then, at just the right moment, Jarek gave the signal. The Duskborn struck. Kale and the others moved quickly, their weapons flashing in the moonlight. The elven soldiers didn't stand a chance. They were trained and skilled, but they were caught off guard. Kale's breath came in sharp bursts as he fought, his every movement precise. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger. In moments, the caravan was in chaos. The guards had fallen, and the Duskborn moved quickly to secure the supplies. Kale stood over the fallen soldiers, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it again. The elves were starting to lose control. But just as the Dustborn began to gather the supplies, a sharp cry rang out from the woods. More elven soldiers had arrived, drawn by the noise of the battle. Kale's stomach dropped. The elves were quick to respond, and now they were outnumbered. Jarek cursed under his breath. "Retreat," he ordered, signaling for the Dustborn to fall back. Kale didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, following the others as they dashed through the trees, trying to put distance between themselves and the elven reinforcements. The forest blurred around him as they moved through the night. Kale could hear the elves shouting behind them, their footsteps growing louder. The Dustborn were fast, but so were the elves. Kale's lungs burned as he pushed himself harder, his legs aching. Finally, they reached the edge of the forest. Jarek signaled for them to stop and regroup. The elves had not followed them further, but Kale could tell they wouldn't be safe for long. They had made another strike, but the cost had been high. The elves would not take this lightly. As Kale caught his breath, he looked around at the Dustborn. They were tired, but there was a spark in their eyes. The resistance was growing. Every strike, every victory was a step closer to the freedom they all dreamed of. Kale didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The elves were no longer untouchable. The fight had only just begun. The days after their raid on the elven caravan were tense. The Dustborn had managed to escape with their lives, but the elves had not taken the loss lightly. In the weeks that followed, the elven soldiers had begun to increase their patrols, searching for any signs of resistance. The city of Lunathar, once a place of quiet control, now hummed with the anxiety of their growing fears. Kale could feel it. The weight of what they had started was becoming heavier. The elves were relentless, and their power was immense, but the spark of rebellion had been lit, and it was spreading. The Dustborn were no longer just a handful of rebels. They were a movement, and every victory, no matter how small, sent ripples through the elven empire. One morning, as Kale was sharpening his blade, Jarek called the meeting. The Dustborn had learned of a new lead. "We've been searching for the artifact for months," Jarek said, his voice low but urgent. "And I believe we found its location, a temple hidden deep within the elven forest." Kale's heart raced. This was the moment. The artifact, the one thing that could shift the balance of power, might finally be within their reach. "What do we know about the temple?" Kale asked. "It's old," Jarek replied. "Very old. Built long before the elves came to power. It's said to be a place of great magic. The elves have guarded it for centuries, and it's believed to be the source of much of their strength." "So the artifact is there?" Kale asked, his mind racing the possibilities. Jarek nodded. "That's what we believe, but it won't be easy to get to. The elves have set up traps, and the temple is hidden deep within the heart of their forest. It's surrounded by magic we don't fully understand, but if we can get to it..." Kale felt a surge of determination. This was their chance to strike at the heart of the elven power. The artifact could be the key to their freedom. The Dustborn had always been cautious, but now, with the artifact in reach, there was no turning back. The plan was set. Under the cover of night, the Dustborn would make their way into the elven forest. The path was treacherous, and the journey would be long, but the promise of the artifact made it worth the risk. Kale, Jarek, and several others would travel together, knowing that each step forward could be their last. As they entered the forest, the air grew thick with the scent of pine and earth. The trees towered above them, their leaves whispering in the wind. It was a quiet place, almost too quiet. Kale could feel the magic in the air, the faint pulse of energy that seemed to come from deep within the woods. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling became. The forest seemed alive, aware of their presence. Hours passed as they navigated the dense forest. Every now and then, they would stop to listen for any sign of elven patrols, but the forest remained silent. The only sound the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of creatures they couldn't see. Kale's senses were on high alert. He had never been this deep in the forest before, and everything felt different. The trees here were older, the ground softer, and the magic in the air heavier. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone structure, partially covered in vines and moss, the temple. Kale's breath caught in his throat. It was more magnificent than he had imagined. The stone walls were carved with ancient symbols, and a faint light seemed to glow from within. The magic was strongest here. "This is it," Jarek whispered, his voice filled with awe. But there was no time to admire the beauty of the place. They had to move quickly. Jarek led the way, his footsteps silent on the soft earth. Kale followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. They entered the temple, and the air inside was thick with ancient power. The walls were lined with old carvings, and the faint light that had glowed from outside now illuminated the interior in a soft, ethereal glow. As they moved deeper into the temple, the sense of magic grew stronger. Kale could feel it in his bones, a deep, pulsing force that seemed to beckon them forward. The further they went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy. The temple was alive, its walls resonating with the power that had been hidden here for centuries. At the center of the temple, they found a pedestal. On it rested a small, glowing orb. Kale's breath caught. This was it. The artifact, the key to everything. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward it. But just as his fingers brushed the surface of the orb, the air around them crackled with energy. A voice, ancient and powerful, echoed through the temple. "You dare disturb what has been hidden for so long." The ground shook beneath them, and Kale stumbled back. The elves had known they were coming, and now the true test had begun. The air crackled with magic. Kale's hand hovered above the glowing orb, but the moment it touched the surface, everything changed. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a low hum filled the temple, growing louder with each passing second. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the very stones were alive, reacting to their presence. A voice, ancient and filled with power, echoed through the temple, sending a chill down Kale's spine. "You dare disturb what has been hidden for so long," it boomed. The sound of it rattled in his bones, and for a moment, he could hardly breathe. Jarek stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "We came for the artifact. The elves have controlled this world for too long. The time for their rule is over." The voice laughed, but it was a cold, harsh sound, as if it came from somewhere beyond the walls of the temple. "Foolish mortals. You think you can challenge the might of the elves? You are nothing but ants beneath their feet." Kale's heart raced. He knew they had come too far to turn back now. The artifact was close, but the temple itself seemed to be fighting against them, as if it was alive and protecting its secret. Suddenly, the floor beneath them cracked, and a deep rumbling filled the air. Kale stumbled, barely catching his balance. The walls seemed to shift, and the once warm glow from the orb grew colder, casting eerie shadows across the temple. The air was thick with an overwhelming presence. "Prove your worth or leave with nothing," the voice commanded. "You are not worthy of what you seek." Without warning, the stone doors to the temple slammed shut with a deafening sound, trapping them inside. The temperature dropped sharply, and Kale could feel the weight of the magic pressing against him. They were caught. Jarek gritted his teeth. "Stay close," he said, his voice sharp and urgent. "This is no ordinary temple. The elves have protected it for centuries with trials. We'll have to survive them if we want to reach the artifact." Kale nodded, his mind racing. The temple was ancient, and the magic here was unlike anything he had ever felt. He had heard rumors of trials set by the elves, designed to test those who dared seek the artifact. But hearing about it was one thing, experiencing it was another. Suddenly, the floor split open, and a wave of water surged upward, flooding the chamber. It moved quickly, rising toward them, cold and unforgiving. Kale's heart pounded as he scrambled to keep his footing. The water surged higher and higher, reaching toward the ceiling. "Move," Jarek shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He leaped toward the far wall, grabbing hold of a stone ledge and pulling himself up. Kale followed, pushing himself forward with all the strength he had. The water rose faster than he could move, but somehow he managed to find a foothold and climb. The water was relentless, but the trial was only the beginning. As Kale and the Dustborn climbed higher, they found themselves facing yet another challenge. The walls of the temple began to close in on them, the stones grinding together with a terrible screech. The space shrank, forcing them to move faster. Kale's breath was heavy, his muscles burning as he scrambled to avoid being crushed. The walls were narrowing, and the air felt thin. "We can't stop," Jarek urged, his voice filled with urgency. Keep moving. With every passing moment, the walls closed in tighter. Kale felt the pressure rising, both from the collapsing space and from the heavy weight of the trial itself. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pushed forward, his body aching from the strain. Finally, with one last push, they reached a small opening at the top of the temple. The walls had stopped moving, but the sense of danger had not passed. Kale looked down at the others, each of them breathing heavily, their faces grim. They had survived the first trial, but Kale knew it wasn't over. There were more challenges ahead. Jarek turned to face the group, his expression serious. This temple will test us to the limit. We have to stay focused, stay together. The elves won't make it easy. Kale's heart was still pounding, but he felt a surge of determination. They had survived the first trial, and they would survive the rest. The artifact was within reach, and they could not afford to fail now. The elves had underestimated them before, but this time, Kale knew they were ready. They would face whatever the temple threw at them and prove they were worthy. The next trial was waiting, and Kale was determined to face it head-on. The fight for freedom had just begun. The air in the temple felt thick, like it was pressing against Kale's every move. He and the Duskborn had barely recovered from the water trial when the temple shook once again. The walls creaked and groaned, but there was no time to rest. The trial wasn't over, and Kale knew that the hardest part was still ahead. As they moved deeper into the heart of the temple, the temperature dropped, and the faint glow of the orb they had come for flickered in the distance, as if beckoning them forward. But Kale could feel the weight of the magic around him. The elves had designed this place to protect their secrets, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the temple itself was watching them, judging their every move. "We need to be careful," Jarek warned, his voice low and tense. "This place isn't just filled with traps. The elves designed these trials to test more than just our strength. We're going to have to think our way through." Kale nodded, his mind racing. What could be next? The water had nearly drowned them, and the walls had almost crushed them. What other dangers lay ahead? He couldn't allow himself to show fear. They had come this far, and they would not back down now. As they walked deeper into the temple, they came to a wide, open chamber. The walls were smooth and covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift as Kale looked at them. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, and on it, a single shining crystal. It was the same color as the orb, glowing softly in the dim light. "That's it," Jarek said, his voice almost a whisper. "The artifact." "They are guardians," Jarek muttered, his voice tense. "Created by the elves to protect the artifact. We need to defeat them, but it won't be easy." The figures moved forward, their steps slow but purposeful. Kale could feel the weight of their presence, like they were drawing the very life from the air around them. The guardians didn't speak, but their eyes burned with an unnatural fury, as if they were determined to prevent anyone from touching the artifact. Without hesitation, Jarek charged forward, his sword raised high. The others followed, but Kale hesitated for just a moment. He knew that fighting these guardians wouldn't be like any battle they had fought before. The power in the room was unlike anything he had ever felt. The first guardian swung his blade with deadly precision, and Jarek barely managed to block it. The clash of steel echoed through the chamber, but the guardian's strength was overwhelming. Kale's eyes darted around the room, searching for an opening. He saw one of the guardians turn its attention toward him and took a deep breath, steadying himself. The guardian lunged, but Kale was ready. He ducked low, his dagger flashing as he struck. The blade sank into the guardian's side, but it didn't fall. The shadowy figure hissed, its body flickering like smoke. Kale barely had time to react before it swung its sword at him again. He leaped back, narrowly avoiding the blow. "This isn't working," Kale shouted, his heart racing. "We need to destroy them all at once." Jarek called back, struggling to hold off his own opponent. "Look for their weakness." Kale's mind raced. These weren't ordinary enemies. They were part of the temple itself, infused with its magic. The key to defeating them had to be in the room. His gaze flickered to the pedestal where the artifact sat. The crystal was pulsing now, its light brighter than ever before. Then it hit him. The guardians were tied to the artifact. They were there to protect it, and their power came from it. If they could disrupt the artifact's power, they could destroy the guardians. Kale quickly reached into his pack and pulled out a small vial of enchanted powder. Jarek had given it to him earlier, telling him it could disrupt magic if used correctly. Kale didn't hesitate. He threw the powder toward the pedestal, and as soon as it hit the ground, a brilliant flash of light exploded in the room. The guardians howled as their forms flickered and began to fade. The light from the artifact dimmed, and with it, the power of the guardians weakened. Kale and the Dustborn pressed forward, striking as one. With each strike, the guardians' bodies shattered into shadow, their forms disappearing into nothingness. When the last guardian fell, the room grew still. Kale's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around. They had done it. The final trial had been overcome. Jarek walked toward the pedestal, his face grim but victorious. "It's ours," he said softly. "The artifact is finally ours." Kale stepped forward, his hand reaching out to take it. As his fingers touched the crystal, he felt the power surge through him, a wave of energy that seemed to fill every corner of the temple. They had won, but Kale knew this was only the beginning. The elves would come for them now, and the true fight was about to begin. Kale stood still for a moment, feeling the immense power of the artifact flow through his hands. The crystal in his grip pulsed with energy, its light casting eerie shadows across the temple's stone walls. He could feel its magic vibrating deep within his bones, a force unlike anything he had ever experienced. The artifact was more than just a powerful object. It was a symbol of the rebellion, a beacon of hope for all of humanity. Jarek stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing crystal. "This is it," he said, his voice a mix of awe and determination. "With this, we can end the Elven rule." Kale nodded but remained focused on the artifact. They had won the trial, but he knew the elves would not let them leave the temple without a fight. Their enemies were not far behind. The moment they left this place, the elves would come for them. And the elves were not known for being merciful. The ground beneath them suddenly shook, and Kale's grip tightened on the artifact. The temple was alive, and it was angry. The energy from the artifact seemed to fill every corner of the room, and Kale could feel the pressure building. It was as if the temple itself was aware of their victory, and it didn't like it. They turned to leave, but as they did, the walls of the temple began to tremble violently. A loud, deafening roar echoed through the stone halls. The doors they had entered through slammed shut, trapping them inside. The air grew thick with magic, and Kale could feel the presence of something else, something far more powerful than anything they had faced before. From the shadows, elven warriors emerged, their eyes glowing with a fierce determination. They were not ordinary soldiers. These were the elite of the elven army, trained to protect the temple and its secrets at all costs. Each one carried a sword forged from ancient magic, glowing with power that could cut through even the toughest armor. Jarek drew his blade, his eyes narrowing. "Get ready," he whispered. "This is going to be our toughest battle yet." Kale tightened his grip on the artifact, preparing for what was to come. The elven warriors were closing in, their movements swift and precise. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. The first elven warrior lunged at Jarek, his sword moving in a blur. Jarek parried the attack with his own blade, but the force of the strike pushed him back. Kale rushed forward, aiming to assist his friend, but an elven warrior blocked his path, their sword meeting his dagger with a loud clang. Kale gritted his teeth and pressed forward, using the power of the artifact to fuel his strength. With a swift strike, he disarmed his opponent, sending the elven warrior tumbling to the ground. The warrior's eyes flashed with fury as he quickly regained his footing, but Kale was already moving, his body fueled by the determination to protect the artifact at all costs. Jarek fought fiercely beside him, his sword flashing in the dim light of the temple. The elven warriors were skilled, but they were no match for the sheer determination of the Dustborn. They had fought for their freedom for so long, and now they had something the elves didn't: hope. With the artifact in their hands, they were no longer just rebels. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the battle raged on, Kale could feel the power of the artifact growing stronger. It was responding to his will, and with each strike, it seemed to give him more strength, more energy. He had to focus, to keep control, or the magic would consume him. Jarek's voice cut through the chaos. "Kale, we need to move. The elves will overwhelm us if we don't act quickly. Kale nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The elven warriors were relentless, but they had one advantage: the temple's layout. The entrance was blocked, but there was another way out. Kale motioned for Jarek to follow him, and the two of them led the Duskborn through a narrow passageway in the back of the temple. As they ran, the temple's magic seemed to respond, the walls closing in behind them, as if trying to trap them inside. But Kale pushed forward, the artifact guiding them, its light brightening with each step. They reached the exit just as the elven warriors closed in on them. The passage led to a hidden exit at the base of the temple, opening up to the dark forest outside. Kale could hear the sound of the elven warriors behind them, but they were too slow to catch up. With one final push, Kale and the Duskborn burst out into the forest, the cool night air filling their lungs. They had made it. They had the artifact, and they had survived the trials. But as Kale looked back at the temple, he knew that this victory was just the beginning. The elves would not let them escape so easily. They would come for them. But now, Kale had something they could not take away: the power to change the world. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun.